Welcome everybody to a special interview. We got my man Greg Kading back on the show. Greg, how you doing today?
Fantastic. Thanks. How you doing?
Wow, you were so excited when you said that. I hear you. Greg's always excited when he comes to the CTS. And we also got a special guest host. Ladies and gentlemen, the host of Too Old for This, Angie Sørensen. Now, I said it right this time.
You
did I say it right?
Yeah, you did. Very good.
Yes. So Greg, since the last time we spoke, how you been?
Everything's been great, man. I actually just came back from Vegas last night. I was out there a couple of days, and it's still not back to normal. So it's kind of disappointing when you go out there and there's just no life. You go to Las Vegas and it's lifeless. It's like, it's not the way I remember life being. So hopefully we get back on track.
Also, you went to Vegas. You went back to the scene of the crime, huh?
Well, I guess so. Yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, I just got asked to go and be on a panel for September when they do the 25th anniversary for Tupac's, his death anniversary this September. So me and several people are going to go back and just be on a panel and answer questions and kind of sort out some of the things that happened 25 years ago.
You didn't run into Keefe D, did you?
I did not see Keefe D. No, I did not run into Keefe.
So the reason why we got Greg back on the show, if everybody was watching Netflix, you would have saw Crime Scene, a very special documentary about the Cecil Hotel. And Greg was an expert an expert on the show because you was retired when that investigation was going on. Am I correct?
Yeah, I retired in 2010. That incident happened with Elisa Lam at the hotel in 2013. So I had been gone for 3 years. I was asked just to come back and comment on what police procedures would have been like for the investigators that were assigned that case. And my old partner, before I left the LAPD, before I retired, my partner in cold cases was a guy named Tim Marcia, and he's the other detective that gets interviewed on that Cecil Hotel documentary.
Now, my second question is real simple. When you was a police officer or a detective, what was your involvement with the Cecil Hotel? Because the Cecil Hotel has been famous for a lot of crimes, a lot of disappearances. Did you, when you was a detective, did you ever have to do any dealings with the Cecil Hotel?
No, I don't recall ever going there specifically for any other criminal investigation. But it had a reputation. I mean, everybody knew the Cecil Hotel kind of had this sordid past and reputation, but it was not completely unique in LA. There's several hotels that have had some pretty spectacular incidents happen there. So you hear about those, and maybe you end up over there for one reason or the other. But yeah, it's really a tragedy because when you look at the history of that hotel, it's really interesting the way, it was prominent and it fell into disarray because of where it was located. Like geographically, that's like the worst place you can possibly stay in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting story, but insofar as Elisa Lam, it's more of a tragedy.
I watched the show, and I don't normally actually watch anything like that because I can't sleep otherwise. But I binge watched it, and I actually have a question a little bit, before we get into like the actual Cecil Hotel. I have sort of a more general question, as I guess it's I don't know what you'd call it, like a regular person, someone who doesn't work in police enforcement. And so, I just want to say, like, up top, like, because when the whole Big Tupac murder happened, like, at the time I lived in Belgium, so the whole following the US news or the US culture wasn't really a thing for me or my friends. But I, of course, heard about those murders. And, so we knew that there was like this whole West Coast and East Coast situation that, they didn't like each other. And at the time we were watching the North and South series. It was called North and South series in Belgium. So we knew like East, West, North and South. No one liked each other over there from what it looked like. That was the picture. But obviously, I know it's not really like that. But, when you do a job like you do, when you're actually seeing all those things really happening and you're watching all these you're witnessing all this horror. Like, one, how do you sleep at night? And two, how do you even like trust anyone? Do you even trust anyone? And when you watch when you have to work through things like that.
Well, you become accustomed to it just through exposure. You know, when you go to your first dead body crime or your first dead body scene as an officer, you're probably going to be a little bit more uncomfortable than you will be moving forward, because then you start to see them regularly and start to deal with just the dynamics of those type of events. And so I think you become a little bit desensitized to them. But you hope not to. You don't want to see a dead body just as another dead body. You want to recognize it as a person that had value and deserves justice and those type of things. So you're always kind of battling those two things, but you also have to build up a barrier and a wall.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will go home and take some of the emotional and psychological damage that that could be a consequence of that. So it's just I think a balancing act in order to maintain good objective perspective on things. And the second question was,
how do you even trust anyone? Do you trust anyone? Because you've seen the worst in people almost, I'm guessing.
So that's a great question, actually. And I don't know actually how I feel about that, because you have to be skeptical of what people are saying, because you get lied to all the time. And you're constantly trying to figure out the truth amongst all of these lies. So you get very skeptical. But at the same time, you have to trust people. You have to put some value into what they're saying in order to progress through your investigation, and also just to maintain a positive outlook on people. You can't just suspect that everybody's a liar and nobody can be trusted, because that's not good for your own health and your own, worldview. So again, I guess that's a balancing act too. You have to realize, okay, does this person have a motive to lie? And therefore you begin to look at, well, there's a good likelihood, just because they have a motive through self-preservation or through protecting others, whatever it is, they have an inherent motive to lie. But if people don't have a motive to lie, if they're just an eyewitness to a crime and they're only telling you what they believe to be their own truth about that, then you don't suspect them of being disingenuous just because they don't have a motive for that.
But you actually, I meant like, how do you trust? Like, if I was a police officer, I just wouldn't trust anyone walking through that door. But I meant like, how do you trust people like in your life? Like I was going to say real life, but nothing gets realer than, watching crime almost, but being witness to crime. But how do you trust like friends and family? How do you not sort of almost go, I know what human nature is capable of. Like, how do you not blend those two things? Kind of what I meant.
Because people prove themselves to be trustworthy oftentimes. You go in and you typically will give people the benefit of the doubt just on first impressions. You want to believe that people will tell you the truth. But if they establish themselves as people who constantly misrepresent things or constantly mislead you, then you lose faith in them. And therefore you become skeptical of them and anything else that they say. But if somebody has a track record of being honest and being, transparent, then you begin to develop trust. You're like, well, I've known this person for a long time, and we've had our differences, but we've never lied to me. They've never proven themselves. So I think you do it all on face value and through a series of experiences with any individual. You either begin to trust them or you don't.
Yeah, it makes sense. You keep that distance, and at the same time, I like that.
So, Greg, when did you first heard about the Lam case?
Well, obviously it was on the news, and I knew several of the people that were working as the primary detectives. There was a guy named Greg Stearns and another guy named Wally Tonelli. And I knew Wally for years, a fantastic investigator. And these two guys were the primary lead investigators on Elisa Lam's case. And of course, they have the resources of all these other support investigators that will also come and work collaboratively in order to find her. Because initially, remember, she's just a missing person. And so I knew those guys that were working it. I saw the media coverage on TV about it. And then, of course, there was all this kind of unfortunate thing where right in the middle of, like, her case was the most high profile thing going on in Los Angeles for 3 or 4 days. And then another huge thing broke out with this guy named Christopher Dorner, who was this disgruntled cop, ex-cop, that went on a shooting rampage. And then all the focus went over on to him and the manhunt for him and trying to figure out what was going on. And the Elisa Lam case kind of took a backseat to that, unfortunately. But that's how I knew about it. It was really the same way everybody else did, just through media coverage. But I happened to know the people that were involved in working the case too. So that just made it a little bit more unique for me.
Now, when we first talked, we was talking about the Tupac and Biggie murders, and on your documentary, you talked about a lot of times people will give you leads, stupid leads, like Oprah killed Tupac, and you'll get hundreds and hundreds of leads, and you have to check out every single one of them. With that said, how frustrating for an investigator, like on this case, you had a lot of internet detectives, people who have never even did a case or never wore a badge, but was right there to tell you cops, this is what happened. You need to go look at this. How frustrating is that for cops?
I think it's only frustrating if it gets in the way. If it's the type of activity that inhibits or interferes with the progress of the case, or reveals information that you don't want revealed to the public just because you want to use that to your advantage, then it becomes frustrating. But at the same time, you know, you get it. People are naturally curious. These are high profile human interest stories, and that people want to contribute. You know, people do care. And I think there's a lot of genuine, you know, internet sleuths out there that want to see unsolved cases solved and mysteries resolved, and those. So I respect that and I get that, and that's fine, as long as it doesn't interfere with the progress of the legitimate investigation, and also as long as it doesn't falsely accuse innocent people, because that creates damage and havoc that people oftentimes don't even recognize or respect. You know, and it happened both in Biggie's case. A man was falsely identified and for years was vilified as a murderer, and that had a huge impact on his life. And then you saw that also in the Elisa Lam case with this Mexican musician who, you know, became a subject of internet, you know, suspicion. He wasn't even at the hotel at the same time. It's been a year, but yet that gets overlooked because it's too convenient, too sensational, and too scandalous for people to just, you know, sometimes you ignore the facts just in the pursuit of a good story. And that's what people do.
So my next question is real simple. Do you feel like this guy in the way of the investigation? All those people that come on, because to me, watching it, I felt the people were interfering in the investigation. I don't know how you felt. I don't know how Angie felt. I felt like these people were interfering in the investigation.
Well, if the police department and the detectives that are assigned the case, if they're getting flooded with constant, hey, you know, you guys need to look at this, or you guys need to do that, or you guys, you know, then you do it inhibits the progress of the case because you get preoccupied chasing false leads, and it's a waste. You're wasting time. And the police department doesn't really investigate everything. They'll investigate things that are plausible. You know, for instance, like, you know, in both Biggie and Tupac's case, Biggie's case in particular, there was an episode of America's Most Wanted. And during America's Most Wanted, all of these, you know, after the episode is aired, a lot of people were calling in, and all of those phone calls then had to be kind of evaluated. And people would call in and, hey, I know who killed me. Or, you know, people were even calling in and confessing to the murder, saying, I was there, I killed him. And then you find out that that person's actually calling from a mental institution where he's been housed for, you know, 4 years. But, you know, so there's 15, 20, 30 minutes out of your day just to find out that that phone call was an absolute waste of time. And so it interferes like that, so, you only have so much time in a day and so much time to allocate towards an investigation. And if you're spending it, wasting your time on rabbit holes, there's a cost there. There's a cost to that. And especially in the early days of an investigation where your momentum in an investigation is critical. Once you start getting leads and you're getting momentum and you're building a theory and you're starting to substantiate this theory, you don't have time to get distracted because you lose momentum. And the suspects in the case, when you lose momentum, they gain more room, right? So suspects in a case are always going to benefit by having all of this noise thrown into the investigator's way. And the suspects learn too. They learn what's taking place in an investigation because of some of the things that happen in the media, some of the things that happen with the follow-ups to these clues. And so suspects can often use that stuff to their advantage. And that's difficult as an investigator because you don't want to give your suspect any advantage. You don't want him to know anything if you can prevent it.
But that's almost like part of that double-edged sword of, like, I call it crowdsourcing, that part in the Cecil Hotel documentary when they put out that video of Elisa Lam in the lift. It was just like when I was watching it unfold over the 4 episodes, it was like there was this mix of like I felt touched that so many people wanted to make sure justice was served, that that was either she was found. I think people were still hoping she'd be found, or that if it was a murder, that the person would be found and so on. But it was like, as much it felt like this angelic situation, the flip of the coin is that the minute all these people, I don't know how many of them there were, but there must have been a lot, on all these forums and these Facebook groups, they then turn and they become evil themselves. Or when like you said, there are other victims now, like the guy Morbid, who was falsely accused. He wasn't even there. The hotel manager, the investigation team also were accused. Everyone was accused basically. But it's like, when I was watching what was going on with the guy Morbid, and let's be clear, I had to cover my eyes when they were showing his videos and his photos. It is morbid to me, because but I guess I'm a bit maybe a bit weird like that, but I found it a bit but that doesn't mean he's a murderer. And the thing is, when it is out there crowdsourced almost, it's like with anything else at the moment, people are having pieces of the puzzles for a good reason, because like you said, the suspects must not know ahead of you how much you have, so they cannot be a step ahead of you, right? So you're going to give them a piece, and the problem is that people think they have the whole picture and they don't. And it's like that with everything, at the moment. It's almost like a reflection of society. At the moment, everyone is an expert on any hot topics. We're all doctors, politicians, you name it, everything now. Everyone's they know everything, and that is and I guess with that, I was wondering, what happened, for example, to this guy Morbid in the Elisa Lam case. He tried to take his life and so on. Is there anything, if that happens, because that can happen to any of us, to be falsely accused, is there anything that can be done when this happens? Can you actually call the police and say, can anyone do anything if you're falsely accused? Because that's to me, that's criminal.
It really should be. You should be responsible. You should have to be held accountable and responsible when you put out information that turns out to be false, and you should have known it was false. So for a guy like Morbid in his role in this whole thing, the police department knew right away, this isn't even plausible. The guy wasn't even there. He was there a year prior.
Yeah.
And we're not going to use some, convenient lyrics from his song in order to blend together this likelihood of him being involved, because he talks about water in the song and she's found in a water tank. These really loosely based, what the internet might call, clues.
Yeah.
And so, from a professional perspective, Morbid was never a suspect. He would never have been considered even a person of interest. But the internet runs with that. And of course, there's consequences and damage to his reputation. And that's what happens with conspiracy theorists. As you just said, they just take pieces of puzzles, figure out a way to make them fit, and then say, we have a really, a picture has emerged.
Yeah.
But most of the time those pieces don't fit, and they're leaving out a whole bunch of necessary pieces that establish a completely different picture.
It's like being with a paranoid partner, isn't it? Well, I saw you gave a look to someone, you're cheating. It's like, it's almost that kind of mentality. It's like you have one piece out of context. Like it's like there was this like amazing support group almost, because at first you're like, yeah, let's find Elisa Lam, but at the same time it's like, wow, But that's to my second question, is that I was wondering about the Lyft scene, because I mean, obviously that's really good for effect in the documentary, that Lyft scene. But when I was watching it, and I know Joey has opinion on that one as well, is that when I watched it the first time, I didn't think that she was looking at spirits. And don't get me wrong, I believe in ghosts, but I didn't think that she was looking at a spirit. I didn't even think there was someone there. I thought when I watched it, she looks like, that she had, it turned out it was something else, but to me it looked like someone who had a very strong episode of OCD, like when children, they touch all the button of the lift, must press all the button, you come out, you walk in a weird way, it's like not the line of the, must not cross the line of the pavement, that kind of manic behavior. And my question to that is, and I know you weren't part of the investigation, but I wonder maybe you could shed some light on it, is why, because from what I understood was that they released that video so that to see if someone could recognize her. So I thought a picture would have sufficed, or a few seconds of the videos would have sufficed, right? Because the whole thing looks very weird. Like, I mean, I can understand why people make up all these conspiracies around that video. So why would they release the whole thing? Because it looks, I mean, it can, be interpreted many ways.
It can, and you get different impressions from just a still photo. When you just look at a still photo, maybe like the photo that they were using in the documentary, which might have come from, a selfie on one of her travels or something from the family provided. That can be a very different looking person than a person in motion, actively. So there's little nuances that can cause a person to say, "Oh, I think I saw her in the lobby," versus just seeing a poster on a sign, on a wanted poster. It'll just click differently in your mind.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why they used that, because it was present at the location where she disappeared from. It showed some behavioral mannerisms. It showed her clothing. And sometimes those are the things that'll trigger a memory or a recognition in a person's mind. So they were using both. They had the photos of her, and then also this, just to kind of cover as much base as possible. And going back to like what I was saying earlier, just since we're on the subject matter of that video, you'll notice that the timestamp on the bottom is blurred out. Well, that's done for a good reason. That's done for a necessary reason, because there's a good potential that if she's been abducted or kidnapped or murdered, a suspect might be watching that. And so you don't want to disclose specific times.
Yes.
You want to keep that information to your advantage. So when you're interviewing somebody and he says, yeah, I saw her get out of the interview, or I saw her walking away from the elevator, and you say, well, what time did you see her? You don't give them that time, so that you can use that to your advantage during your investigative process.
Yeah.
But of course, people are all like, oh no, the LAP is trying to cover it up, and that's why they blurred it out. So you just have to deal with all of those different reactions to things.
I think like that lift closing all of a sudden, maybe it's interesting they left that in. It was, in a way, it was very transparent of the police to kind of leave that bit in, but that whole all of a sudden it closes behind her. I mean, that was frightening. Maybe they could have cut that, but it's I'm glad you brought up the timestamp, because I know Joe and I were talking about it earlier.
I just got an email.
It's true, they just shouldn't be giving away all the clues, It's common.
And everybody, like you said earlier, everybody has an opinion and everybody's an expert. I got an instant message yesterday from this girl, and she says, Greg, it's so important that you recognize this. I am a sign language teacher.
Okay.
And she says, I think that Elisa Lam was trying to communicate through sign language. because of these weird hand mannerisms. Well, it's not sign language, but this particular person, because it gives them some type of, it gives you a sense of you're helping or you're contributing. So look into this. It's a sign language thing. It's like, okay. And again, this just goes back to the type of things that an investigator has to evaluate and consider, and then validate if it's a good lead.
Yeah, it's hard. You don't want to stop people's good intentions either, but it's like it's a double-edged sword. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Well, remember that other documentary that came out a while ago, really popular, called Cats?
I haven't watched it because I would be too scared. I've heard this. I'm scared of it. I don't want to watch it.
It's a little bit disturbing, but those internet sleuths, because law enforcement didn't know, really, they didn't have any jurisdiction over this thing, because they didn't know where these, possible crimes were happening. And it was very difficult to nail down who should be looking into this, and so, but the internet people collaborated and did an amazing job of locating this guy and finding other information. So that was a good example of where people are filling in where the police are falling short.
So there's where helpful, I guess, then, because I haven't watched it. Okay, so I guess the cat, maybe like it says that cat people are clever. Maybe like maybe that's what it is. So if you're being called a cat lady, it's fine. It's a compliment. Yeah, I'm smart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Greg, watching the miniseries, I couldn't help but think when they were searching the roof. The first place. Now, I mean, my background. I'm not a detective. I'm probably as guilty as these internet sleuths. But the first thing I thought when I saw the roof, and I didn't know anything about this case, somebody should check those tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Why, in your opinion, why didn't the detectives check the tanks?
So it was clearly an oversight, and I guarantee the detectives looking back were like, "Jeez, how did we miss that?" But at the same time, being present and putting myself into the mindset of those investigators, they're walking around. The likelihood is that she's either gone missing intentionally, where she's gone off about her travels, or she's been abducted, but that's, you don't, like, naturally thinking, you're like, well, if somebody were going to get abducted, you take them to your room, try to dispose of the body. It's not a natural, conclusion to draw, like, oh, probably up in those water tanks, which would be about the most difficult place you could even think of to try to dispose of a body. Right? It's like that. It's like, just thinking logically, it wouldn't necessarily occur like, oh, if somebody had her, oh, they're going to climb these steps and haul her up there and dump her in a tank. Of course, it should have been checked. And then the idea, if you're thinking that somebody has just left on their own accord, you're not going to go look in a water tank. You're going to think that they've just checked out and left their stuff behind or whatever. So, I guess I'm trying to give some explanations for it. I'm not justifying the fact that they missed her. Clearly, I guarantee you, some real some regrets on part of the investigators. Mm-hmm. But I also understand, like, if I was in a house and somebody was missing in a house, I wouldn't look up the chimney, because that's just not a place that you naturally are going to think someone's going to be, concealed. I would look in under beds, and I'd look in chests, and I'd look in cupboards and closets and all of that. But probably it's not going to dawn on me like, oh, I need to go up on the roof and look down into the chimney. So it was just a mistake. And of course, it wouldn't have mattered insofar as her ultimate fate. She was already dead by then. But yeah, all of the subsequent search for her and everything that had to take place would have obviously been avoided if they'd found her earlier.
So anything that you can share that was not presented on the miniseries, something that it was very important, but the directors missed out on it. Anything that you could tell us about the case? Because honestly, I didn't know anything about it. This was the first time I ever heard of the Cecil Hotel. to this documentary. Is there anything that they left out about this case, or anything they left out, any important information about the Cecil Hotel that they didn't share in the documentary?
Two things that probably could have been emphasized more. They did touch on it, but I think that they should have spent a little bit more time emphasizing. When people are drowning, it's a very natural reaction to shed your clothes, because when you go into a state of panic and in desperation, anything that's inhibiting your movement, like wet clothes, you will shed. And they didn't really, they touched on it very quickly, but I think they should have said that it's very common and is not unusual in drowning accidents, where somebody's out in a situation where they're treading water and treading water and treading water and just trying to buy time, that they'll shed their clothes. Because that has always been a real big question. It's like, wait a minute, why are her clothes off? It makes no sense. But it does if you have some history or experience with drownings. And then the other thing I think that they didn't emphasize enough was how there are a lot of different levels to mental health. There's mental health, there's people with severe schizophrenia that when they're on their medication, they can, they can function great. But when they go off their medication, I don't know, a lot of people probably don't have personal experience with extreme mental health issues. But when you do, and you've seen this type of behavior before, and you're familiar with what happens to people that are severely bipolar or schizophrenic, they become completely different people, and they have these delusional episodes, as she was having in the elevator. And they didn't really emphasize that she had this history of hiding. She would see things and go and hide and conceal herself, and when you do recognize that, appreciate that, then it's not so weird that this is, she was looking for a place to hide. And unfortunately, she got into a place that she couldn't get back out of. So those are the two things. I just think they could have made a little bit more of a point about, what happens, maybe had a psychiatrist on there talking about severe mental health behavior. And then also just the little thing about the clothes, it could have been better explained.
Yeah, no, I was wondering, I'm going to ask you now, Joey answered that question for me now, but I wonder if I had that question, I'm thinking other people may have had that same question, was it didn't make sense watching the documentary when they said that, it didn't make sense to me when they found her because she was clogging the water pressure. Now, when the way they picture it in the documentary is that there's still water in the tank, and I didn't understand why they said she was clogging it. Like, how did that impact the pressure, her being in the tank? Because if there was still water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, her clothes had all, her clothes sunk to the bottom. And just like if you go to your sink and put a wash rag over the drain, it's going to inhibit the drainage. Same thing with that. And of course, so that was one of the problems, is that it was clogged by her clothes. And in fact, what they ended up having to do, ultimately, I think they did show this in the documentary, was cut a hole in the side of the tank, allow the water to completely drain to where she would just come to gently rest on the bottom, and then remove her from the bottom of the tank after cutting a hole out. Yeah, so that was it. Her clothes basically kept the pipes from flowing.
Yeah, it makes sense when you explain it, but in the documentary, to me, like, I couldn't picture it, I didn't understand. And the other thing I was wondering, now it could have maybe just have been how the documentary was edited, but I was wondering why they didn't. There was one thing I wish they had nipped in the bud, was the question of the lid, because when they show the footage of I can't remember his name, but the person in the police saying, when the police came at the crime of the scene, the lid was closed. But he does say when the police came to the scene of the crime. But obviously, when watching the documentary, we knew that the police was called to come back to the scene of the crime. So, but why? Now, I don't know, maybe like when it happened at the time in 2012, maybe they did say, oh yeah, no, but the maintenance guy, he because he found her, he opened the lid, and it makes sense to me that a human, after you see something like that, you'd close the lid out of respect, or you'd like, when you put like a sheet over someone's head, or you close their eyes. It's almost like those rituals that we have, around death. And then I could imagine him out of respect. He sees this naked girl in there, and he puts the lid on. But why was this not nipped in the bud, and people's imagination went wild? Well, of course you couldn't close the lid behind her if she drowned, or yeah.
Yeah, so that was really just came down to a innocent communication breakdown. When investigators go out there and they're doing their crime scene investigation, and then they report their findings to a lieutenant reports it to a captain, and the captain tells the commander tells the deputy chief, and the deputy chief then goes and tells, so there's these, just constant, it's like telephone, the game. And so small little things sometimes get lost in translation. Obviously, the lid was open when the maintenance guy found it, because that's exactly what that was his testimony, so to speak. He says, I got up there, the lid was already open. And so therefore, the big question about how could she have closed the lid herself? Well, now you don't have that question because she never did. But the communication breakdown with the police department when Andrew Smith was the name of the individual that was giving that press conference. And Andrew Smith just had bad information. He wasn't an investigator. He was never there. He's just reporting information as it has been, climb the chain of command, and small little things like that.
Actually, what he says is not inaccurate. What he says is correct. Like he says, when the police, from what I remember, like he says, when the police arrived, the lid was closed. That's basically what he says. He doesn't say when she was found, the lid was closed. But it's of course like at the time when people listen, they go, oh my God, the lid is, they may not know that the police was called, but it was one of those things again, when, when you only have a piece of the puzzle.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, the communication issues.
So there's two possibilities there. It was either a communication issue where it was always open and he just, made that comment. Yeah, the police got there, it was closed. Because we don't hear the maintenance worker ever say specifically that I closed it back up. After I saw her, I closed it, and then the police went up there, and of course they would have seen it already closed. So those are two possibilities, but either of them are relatively innocent.
Yeah.
It's just a small, it's just a small detail that really doesn't have anything to do with the larger picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I was to ask you one last question. It would be sort of like outside of, that Cecil or Tupac or any of that, but like, I'm just really obsessed with like that, how you, with that line of work in a way, like how, because like, you were explaining, of course, you cannot be too involved in a situation because, I guess you have to like preservation, survival of yourself, but you also don't want it to be so easy that, you hear, you watch things that are horrendous and it's like, whatever, like you kind of want to keep that human thing. So how do you, and I guess that would be like almost like something, a skill that a lot of us could learn, is like, how do you develop a thick skin, so that you can keep your human nature inside, but you have to have some sort of a little bit of a shield going on. Like, do you have any tips for people who may be a bit sensitive in nature, how to build a thicker skin?
Well, I think that human compassion and empathy is one of our great qualities, and we should never let go of that, no matter what. But again, at the same time, you have to recognize that life and our surroundings, oftentimes in society, it's brutal. I mean, there you just see a lot of ugliness and a lot of hurt and damage done. And if you are so sensitive that stuff emotionally disturbs you every day, you're just going to walk around like a basket case. And so you've got to just figure out how to balance that out. Understand the importance of empathy and compassion, and utilize it as much as possible. But at the same time, recognize that there are some things you can't do anything about. And so try not to let them affect you emotionally and personally, and psychologically. Because then, you become a victim of your own inability to protect yourself.
Yeah. It's kind of almost like a very Zen saying where you just said, like, accept what you can. What is it? What they say? Accept what you can change. No, accept what you cannot change. The things you cannot change. I think it maybe is a Christian saying. But anyways, it's
yeah.
like accept the things you cannot change. No, it's in the AA. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, accept the things you cannot change, right? So yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, but you have to be able to keep a distance. You cannot be a sponge. Otherwise, yeah, you wouldn't function in that job,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, no, thank you so much, Greg. Again, it's been
You're very
really
welcome. It's good
interesting.
talking to you.
Well, I got one more question about the Cecil Hotel. This has been going on for 30, 40 years now. Skid Row, Cecil Hotel. Any chances they're going to clean that area up? Any chances they're going to do something with the Cecil Hotel? They said at the end they got new management. But I don't see how it works to have bad elements on one floor and then residents on the other. I don't know how that works. It's politics. So my question to you is, you from LA. What's the plan for the Cecil Hotel? I mean, is it because I personally would never ever. I do my every time I travel, I do my investigation around the area, and I would never ever stay somewhere like the Cecil Hotel. And why people will want to, I have no clue. So my question is real simple: are they going to do anything? LA is going to do anything to once and for all? Do anything to clean up Skid Row? Clean up the Cecil Hotel? What's their plans?
I don't think they have a plan, to be honest with you. Insofar as the Skid Row and the homeless dilemma in Los Angeles, it's just increasingly getting worse. And of course, you know, it's a very complicated problem, obviously, very, very complicated problem. And I just don't think they have a plan. I think politicians will tell you that they have a plan, but if they did, they certainly aren't putting it into action because the problem's getting worse. The Cecil Hotel, I don't see how these two worlds coexist. I don't see how you have, 7 floors of luxury hotel with 12 floors or whatever it is of low income, long-term housing where it's just people with, just barely surviving, lots of drug addiction, lots of crime. I don't see these two worlds effectively intersecting and coexisting.
Makes no sense to me whatsoever. Maybe
Yeah,
I live it. Maybe I live in this place called reality, but hey, that's why I don't go to California.
I think it's a bit like, if I could say something about that, I guess I'm not American, so I don't understand the culture of, I don't know the inside out, but I would say it's a bit more than just, I guess when saying cleaning up the Skid Row, because it's not so much about it's still human beings, so you can't just move it from one postcode to another. It's almost like it's a bigger issue, right? You have to it's that these are human beings who are living like that, and I think it's down to the human level. We need to something has to change, because saying things like cleaning up an area, well, then what happens to those people? They're going to go into another area. So it's almost like it's not. So it's it's a very complex issue. And obviously, again, I don't know anything about LA, but it's not okay for in a modern world to have such a huge street with so many people, so many homeless people in one place like that, and that danger. There's women there, and it's frightening. I'm scared for them, and it's
Well, Angie,
I mean, I don't think anyone's going to stay in the Cecil Hotel now after that Netflix show.
I'm gonna put my input on that. I think the reason why it's such a sensitive issue is because of the climate that we have in the United States right now. I'm not saying separate the homeless, move the homeless out of the way. When I say clean it up, I mean, there's crime there. There's a lot of elements there. And Greg probably can shake his head on this because he knows this is probably not possible. But in a good world, let's have more police in that area. Let's have more, a more police standard in that area. They have police surround the area, so when somebody is getting raped, there's a cop right there. Or you understand what I'm saying? But Greg can tell you right off the bat, that's not reality. They can't have, it's only so many LA cops that go around. So somebody's gonna have to do something, come up with a plan.
I don't think it's about more police. It's just about, I think it's a whole different episode, but it's almost like, I guess what I want to say is it's not because it's not a lack of police or need more police, it's that effectively these are people living in the situation, and it's like it's not the crime is not the cause. It's like we need to go down to the cause, wherever the cause is, and how, the thing is that people have ended in Skid Row. That's almost already too late. Does that make sense? Like that's why it's a bigger issue. People shouldn't have to live like that. And unfortunately, of course, like, when criminality is so intense in that that one area, it is a huge issue. But it's almost like at that point, it's almost like we've already let them down, whoever let them down or whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? It's just like it's like that situation. That's why it's so complex. Again, I don't know anything about US politics.
It's enormously complicated and very, very technical. Personally, I have an opinion, but it's just an opinion. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a social worker. I can only tell you that what seems to make the most sense, and I don't think you can actually do this. I just think that this is a great idea that's probably impractical for legal reasons. But LA has plenty of room where you can build, hangars like they have for aircraft, like they do out at the airport, just massive hangars.
Like a warehouse?
Well, basically warehouses, but, maybe not a permanent structure, but, these just massive type of, it wouldn't cost much to have these type of facilities that have good plumbing and have good medical care and have a safe environment with beds and a staff that completely, and provide for these people in a way that they're better off in an environment where they've got medical assistance if necessary. There's security there in order to protect everybody. And there's, in order to accommodate these people who cannot care for themselves.
Yeah.
So you have to care for them.
Yeah.
A lot of people down there just so much of this is a mental health issue. They can't work. They can't get jobs. Oftentimes they just don't have the mental capability to function within society oftentimes. So if you there's plenty of room in Southern California. If you could create a place where homeless people could go and be taken care of and looked after, and then it opens up the rights of all those people that are down there trying to run businesses and trying to have their restaurants. They can't because there's so many homeless camping out in front. Nobody wants to go into their restaurant or into their dry cleaners or into their office supply store, right? So all those business owners are victims of this homeless population that nobody really takes into consideration.
Yeah.
So you've got to solve the problem. You have to get the people out of there.
Yeah.
But now how do you forcibly remove people that's kidnapping?
It is their home, isn't it? Like, that's the thing, isn't it? It's that mentality too. It's like, it's your home, it's your network, it's your family, right? So as much as it's horrendous, you have this attachment of where you are. It's like, like the devil, And so that's why when someone's been homeless for over years, so it's really hard to remove them, because it's like, well, there's this whole thing of like their entourage is going, who do you think you are? You're better than us. You're going to go and like live in somewhere with a roof, like what, it's really like, so but it's true. Like, I think helping them being in a safer place will actually also increase the economy of the local area, because it's right. Like, it's dangerous for businesses. It's, you can't walk at night there. I mean, it's, it's shocking to watch.
Mess.
It's shocking to watch. Yeah, like in Denmark, I've lived in Denmark for, many years ago, and I go there a lot. But it's like that. Just it's shocking to watch. It's like we wouldn't let someone like that. No one. But again, that's also why we have high taxes, right, in Denmark. And so there's of course there's a whole infrastructure. It's a lot more. That's why it's so complex. But yeah, I like the idea of like, giving them somewhere where they can have a shower and a bed. That would be it's a basic human right. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you this. It's a problem that can be solved, and luckily Netflix will solve it. With that said, Greg,
they'll give them a show.
Yeah.
Give them a show. Give them some money. Yeah. Yeah.
Greg, I got some comments for you, man. Just a month ago, right after we talked, I saw a debate that you was a part of. I didn't see it before we talked, but it was a debate. It was an author. He wrote a book about the Tupac and Biggie murders, or was part of the Russell Poole theory. And y'all two went at it. I mean, y'all two, I thought y'all was going to fight. But we also have some people that commented on the interview that I want, maybe you can probably clear up. One person wrote, the story sounds good, but who can confirm Keefe D's story? Nobody, supposedly everyone is dead. What about the guy who gave him the gun in Vegas? I think you cleared that up in the interview. Would you like to clear it up again?
Yeah, so the guy that gave him a gun is also dead. He died some years ago. His name was Eric Von Zip, Quan Williams. He had several aliases, but most people in Harlem, New York knew him as Zip. He was a close associate of Puffy's. He was also a close associate of Keefe D's, and Keefe D had been providing him PCP and cocaine over the years, shipping it from California to New York, where Zip dealt it. So that guy is the one who was in Vegas at the time and provided the gun that was used to kill Tupac. He had given it to Keefe D. Keefe D then in turn gave it to his nephew, Orlando Anderson, who leaned out the car and shot Tupac. So that was the relationship. There was informants that came along early on in the investigation that were solidifying these details. So all of that was substantiated. And then when Keefe D finally gives his confession and talks about his conversations with Puffy, his conversations with Zip, his interaction with different individuals in this ongoing war, it all just kind of validates itself, just because all of the circumstances support everything that he's saying in his confession. So that's one of the ways that we validated it. There were things that we didn't put out there just because we weren't going to disclose the names of some of the informants who were providing information. But I can just tell you, as an investigator who worked that case day and night for 3 straight years, absolutely positively, Keefe D was in the car, gave his nephew the gun, who shot and killed Tupac. His name was Orlando Anderson. So
the second thing, Orlando, from a young lady, Orlando had an alibi. Brent Becker, the lead detective, said so himself. It's in Kathy Scott's book, The Killing of Tupac Shakur. Third, I can't understand, it's a little gibberish, but The Killing of Tupac, page 298, 299. It states, after Anderson was beaten up, he was taken to the MGM Grand basement and interviewed by MGM security. After that, he was detained further so that he could be interviewed by the Las Vegas police. Becker said himself, Anderson never had time to follow the entourage. Your take?
Anderson didn't follow an entourage. Anderson was hanging out over by the elevator lobby, or the foyer area by the elevators. He is waiting for the other members of his crew to come back out of the arena. They had all gone out there, but they didn't have tickets together. So he's out there just loitering, waiting for the rest of his boys to show up. And that's when Tupac and Trayvon Lane are walking by. And Trayvon Lane points Orlando Anderson out to Tupac and says, "Yo, Pac, man, there's that that stole my chain a couple months ago, right over there." Tupac took it upon himself to run across the foyer and sucker punch Orlando Anderson. And then that just led to the gang beatdown, which led to the retaliation, which led to the murder. So it was all just simple circumstantial stuff. Orlando Anderson's just out there waiting for his friends. He's the one that gets seen. He didn't see Tupac initiate anything. Tupac and Trayvon Lane saw him and then attacked him.
Last one, because I know you're busy. Well, actually, 2 more. Yeah, last one, because these are kind of redundant and you answered them in the interview. This one, Keefe D was looking at doing serious time, so he told Kading what he wanted to hear. For him, it was a win-win situation. Get the drug charges dropped, and he was also offered immunity, which you would state that he was not offered immunity, from what he told Kading in the session. What he didn't realize was that Kading was planning on releasing a book and a DVD. The Las Vegas police haven't gone into details, but they have said that Keefe D told a completely different story back in '96. Your thoughts?
Okay, so several questions there. A couple of them are correct and a couple of them are completely wrong. When Keefe D sat down with us, he did tell us exactly what we wanted to hear, which was the truth. We said, we want to know the truth. And that's what he told us. So we got exactly what we wanted to hear. So there's some truth to that. However, Keefe D had no idea whether those drug charges were going to be dropped. That was never part of the deal. All we said is that we will take into consideration these pending charges based on the truthfulness of the story you're going to tell. So Keefe didn't have any guarantees whatsoever, and he was never given immunity. He was only given a proffer agreement, which is entirely different than immunity. And so that's wrong. And then Keefe D did back in 96 when he was interviewed. I'm sorry, late 96 when he was interviewed, 97. He did lie. Back then, he's like, man, I don't know what happened. I think it probably should, because at that point in time, like many of these guys, and we discussed earlier, he's lying because he doesn't want to be implicated in a murder. Years later, when the circumstances change and his own situation changes drastically, then he changes the story and tells the real version of what happened. So, yeah, there's, some of that stuff is just misunderstandings because people don't know all of the different dynamics in play. But
I think what people want to believe is, they want to believe the spaghetti monster came down and took Tupac and Biggie, the government conspiracies. A lot of people have a tough time looking at the facts and the evidence. And unfortunately, just like that little documentary on A&E that you was a part of with the civil rights lawyer, people want to build something that really didn't happen. They want the conspiracy. They want to believe that a 25-year-old rapper was somehow in conspiracy with the government and the government had to take him out. Unfortunately, we all know it's not true. Your task force solved the crime. I believe it. I think majority of people who have common sense believe it. With that said, Greg, it's always an honor that you come on the CTS. This was a co-production with the 20 for this cast. You are always welcome back to the CTS anytime. Consider yourself family. Angie, you got any last words? Do you want to plug anything?
No, I just want to say it was really nice meeting you, Greg. I'm not part of the whole culture, so a lot of the questions there with Tupac and Biggie just went over my head. But it was really nice to meet you, and I hope we can do this again sometime. This was really fun. And if you want to keep listening to my podcast, to plug. So for whoever's listening, for people who are listening, sorry, for people who are listening.
Yeah. What Angie's trying to say is every Monday her podcast drops. It's called 20 for is a very entertaining podcast. It talks about relationships. It talks about crime. It talks about sex. It talks about all the stuff that I know.
Health misfits. So people who escape cults.
It talks about sex. Yeah. It talks about stuff that I know nothing about.
There you go.
So that said, Greg, you got anything you want to plug real fast?
No, man. I just appreciate you guys having me on. It's a fun conversation. So yeah, call me back anytime if you ever have any more questions or if another subject matter comes out and I can lend some insight into it. Just give me a holler anytime. Happy to do it.
Thank you,
Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
Really lovely meeting you.
You too. Thanks,
with that said, Greg, Angie, stay on the line. Everybody else, I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.